What the hell happened? See, I opened with that question, but I know what happened. And I'll probably talk about it. I don't usually talk about behind the scenes chicanery. That's an old-timey word. Whenever I discuss TV, movies, whatever. But in this case, it feels really relevant to where American Gods went in its second season. And it went south in what was possibly the worst way for a show like this. It got dull. Because whatever you think about the first season, it was not dull. This time, but look, here's the thing. Part of me wants to say that if I had not seen season one, if this had been season one, effectively, that I would probably like it. I wouldn't love it the way I love season one, but I probably like it decently. But this suffers by the comparison. And that may even be true, but it's a necessary comparison. It's a direct continuation of the exact same show. Like, how can you not compare? So it's not like, oh, you need to look at it in a vacuum. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. So that doesn't work. Even so, that's like the kindest thing I can say to it. And it's not even like it goes massively off the rails in a way that's interesting to talk about. Like, I could talk all day about how Game of Thrones or Dexter went off the rails in their last season. I'd have plenty to talk about there. I don't feel like I have as much to talk about here. Which is probably why I'll end up talking about some of the behind-the-scenes stuff. Actually, let's get that out of the way. So, the showrunners for the first season did not do the show running for the second season. It was done by somebody else who actually was fired before the season started shooting. He wrote the scripts and then was fired, and they then moved ahead with those scripts, and I think they brought in somebody to like polish them up. And then they shot that, and they had like an interim showrunner. And now for season 3, which is supposed to air later this year, it was a completely different showrunner. So, officially, the showrunners for the first season were never actually fired, nor did they quit. They just didn't showrun the second season. Which, if I were to guess in my semi-educated way, I would say most likely the reason that they were not brought back was budgetary. That first season went over budget by millions. And as acclaimed as it was, no network likes something that goes over budget. When they've decided how much they want to pay for something, they expect that thing to be a hit for what they paid for it. So when you spend more than they agreed to spend and you end up with a hit, you go, oh yeah, we spent too much, but we got a hit. The thinking from the purse holders is, well, you were always supposed to make a hit, but you were supposed to make a hit for what we agreed to pay. So that's, if I were to guess, that was the main reason why they were not brought back. I think it was concerned that their sensibilities in terms of both writing and production would put everything over budget again. And it might have, but you can tell they are a lot more conservative with the use of special effects, and many of them are way less inventive. Some of them are still neat, but like right off the bat, first episode, they have the djinn, and he takes his sunglasses off, and they don't even show the fire. Like, it's like 2 frames, and then it's from behind, and like you have the sound of the fire from the eyes. They don't actually show it, because then they'd have to pay for the effect. That costs money. So you can right from episode 1, you can see where things have been trimmed. But the effects ultimately aren't the biggest issue. They are a little bit of an issue because the vibrancy and the effects heavy work was a big part of the feel and the identity of the first season. But there is still some of that here. It's not as much, it's not as pervasive, but what's here is still fairly solid as far as that stuff goes. So it's the writing. That's the problem. And for me to explain this, I might have to spoil some of the book. I'll give you a heads up before I do that, though. So, the main thing is that this season lacks a clear sense of focus and a clear sense of purpose. The first season was all of these characters and all of these threads drawing together. You had Shadow with Mr. Wednesday, who he was learning about. You had Mr. Wednesday collecting these old gods. They were all going to go and meet up together. And it culminated like right before that meeting was going to happen. So we basically built to the meeting. This season opens with that meeting, and then characters split apart again. We spent an entire season pulling everybody together, and now they've just scattered to the winds again, as Mad Sweeney and Laura go off on their own again for a while, and then Laura's with Wednesday for a little bit, and Shadow's left back at the funeral parlor for a while, and Mr. World is doing his own thing, which, if they're going to preserve some of the things about Mr. World from the book, that is making less and less and less sense. But again, that'll tie into spoiler stuff, so I'll come back to that. But and they've got this entire subplot with media, and now it's new media, and then they give Tech Boy like more background, which I'm not sure why. And we get an entire new origin for Mad Sweeney, which isn't uninteresting, but I actually liked what we found out about him in season 1 better, and that felt like enough that for us to get. And addressing the media thing, they also lost some actors. It's not 100% clear why. Whether it was dissatisfaction with the scripts, whether it was just availability because this thing took so long to get off the ground, or a combination. So Kristen Chenoweth, who was Easter at the end of the first season, she's not back. Her absence is taken care of in a very hastily said line that makes no sense, but fine. And then Media, played by Gillian Anderson. Now, Media they couldn't get rid of. They could have, but they decided they weren't going to. They were going to keep Media around. So instead we have the rebirth of new Media. Now, here's what I'll say about this. If they were going to keep the character around, going in a vastly different direction from Gillian Anderson's Media and leaning into different kinds of media, more up-to-date types of media, and a completely different personality, was probably the best thing that they could do under the circumstances, because if you try and get someone to come back and recreate Gillian Anderson, it's not going to work. So better to lean the other way and just be like, no, we're not even going to try and do that. Here's this new thing. And new Media is functional. She works decently. I think part of the problem is attitude and tone and line delivery. She's a little bit too close to Tech Boy, or at least what Tech Boy was in season 1. They messed with him a little bit in a way that was like they made him flatter. He wasn't as bouncy as he was before. He didn't have the same kind of energy. I think partially because they gave all the high energy to new Media instead. But again, if they couldn't get Gillian Anderson, I think they handled that about as well as they could. But overall, just this whole season feels like stalling. It feels like wheel spinning. Because like I said, first season, everything was coming together and it was building towards a battle. And in this season, it's building towards a battle. End of this season, we are in not a vastly different place from when the season started. So, spoilers for season 2, if you haven't seen the whole thing yet. So, Shadow isn't with Wednesday anymore, and Sweeney's dead, but what else has changed? Not a lot. Mr. World's thing is, whatever his plan is still cooking at roughly the same pace. Wednesday had a spear, and now he doesn't. So he's back where he started as far as that goes. Laura's still dead. It's so little changes from the start of the season to where it ends. And the climax was very strange to me. The whole thing with, like, the police and everything. I think maybe it's because we've been dealing with gods that, like, the big, oh God, what's going to happen was just the cops showing up. I mean, the way they got brought down and the use of new media, that was pretty good, but, like, really? So, to get into my other complaints, and this all ties into it, the fact that it is wheel spinning, because they are stalling, assuming they even keep it, they are stalling on part of the story. And it feels like they're stalling. Oh, before I get to that, the one other thing I'll say, performances are all good. The material they're working with isn't as great, but the performances are also good. Though for me, the highlight this time, and he was a highlight last time, but last time the complete MVP who walked away with the entire show was Wednesday. It was Ian McShane. Now, Ian McShane's still good in this one, but for me, walking away with the whole thing was Orlando Jones as Mr. Anansi. He was so good. And he was so good last time, but he was even better this time. I love virtually everything about this character. I love his attitude. I love his anger. I love that he does not give a damn what anybody else thinks about what he has to say. I like that he shifts his accent as he talks, and he'll get angrier and he'll get more guttural. I love all of that. And he is apparently not in season 3. I'll touch on this really quick because I already opened the door to behind the scenes stuff. There's conflicting reasons as to why Orlando Jones is not in season 3. His version was that he had a conversation with a new showrunner who basically told him that, well, he basically said he was uncomfortable with Anansi as a character. Something to the effect of this angry character is not what Black America needs as an example. I'm paraphrasing someone who was giving only their side of the story, so don't take that for what was actually said. And that struck me as a little bit, that felt a little bit too clean cut for me to buy completely. That felt like one side of the story and we're missing the other. Now, the other side of the story, the folks who actually did not bring back Orlando Jones did give their side of the story, but for reasons I'll explain in a minute, I'm actually more inclined to believe Orlando Jones under the circumstances, or at least believe the truth leans more in his direction. The word from Starz was that he wasn't fired, his contract wasn't renewed because Anansi does not appear in the sections of the book they're planning to adapt for the 3rd season. Now, the reason I call absolute BS on that is they have diverged so far from the books at this book singular. There is kind of another one because there's Anansi Boys, which is a spinoff, but they're not pulling from the material from that. This thing has diverged so much from the book that they can't hide behind that. And Anansi was a pretty big part of this one. So to just have him vanish and go, well, but he's not in these parts of the book. Yeah, neither was Mad Sweeney. He dies really quick in that book. You kept him around for freaking ever. Don't act like you're not bringing him back because of fidelity to the books. That I don't believe at all. Does that mean I believe 100% Orlando Jones's story? No, but under the circumstances, that has a more of a ring of truth than the other one. So wherever the truth lies, I think it leans a little bit more towards his end of things. But okay. I need to talk book spoilers to get into my latter end complaints as to part of why this has become such a mess. Or at least become so dull. A mess would be more interesting. So, that's your warning. Spoilers for the book, which means potential spoilers for later seasons of this show. Alright. So, the thing is, the show is a little bit in a little bit of an unenviable position. Because they have such a fantastic Mr. Wednesday, But Wednesday spends a very large portion of the book dead. He actually doesn't survive all that. I mean, he survives longer than Mad Sweeney does, but he's dead for a really big chunk of the book. But I can see why, having Ian McShane, they want to keep him around for as long as possible. But keeping him around means that you are delaying the big turning point and the thing that so much stuff is meant to pivot on. You're just delaying that, which is why the second season feels like it's nothing but stalling. Because really, when it opened and they had Cloris Leachman's character killed, it should have opened with Wednesday being killed. But it didn't. And as a result, we're just running on a hamster wheel for pretty much the whole season. Because the plot can't move forward until he dies. That's assuming they're going to preserve the plot at all. Which, they better, if they didn't bring back Orlando Jones, because they're sticking to the plot. Here's the other thing, and I alluded to this. If they're sticking to the book plot, the Mr. World makes no sense. At all. Because, again, spoilers, like, this is the big one. This is the big one. Okay, so in the book, Mr. World isn't real. Mr. World is an act. It's low-key. The entire thing is a con. So all of this, Wednesday gathering everybody up, World having Wednesday killed, that galvanizing the old gods against the new gods so it can actually culminate in the battle. The point of that battle is that battle is in tribute to Wednesday, to Odin, so that he will be reborn and he will be more powerful than ever. The entire thing's a con. If they're going to keep that twist, then their Mr. World makes absolutely no sense. Because he's already missed the opportunity to kill Wednesday, which is supposed to be the thing that the entire con pivots on. And his actions instead now make no sense. It's like, oh, I'm preparing. Preparing for what? It's all fake. What are you preparing? And the thing you need to do to sell your con, you had the opportunity to do it and you didn't. You've had multiple opportunities to do it and you didn't. So they've either got to change that or they have really shot themselves in the foot after this season. Because it makes absolutely no sense now. Oh, and they did the reveal of Shadow being Wednesday's kid, which I didn't love in the book either. I mean, it makes some degree of sense. It's functional. I just... whatever. So... yeah, that's American Gods Season 2. I don't know when I'll get around to Season 3. I don't even know when it's supposed to air. I know it's supposed to be this year. Season 1 was so good. It was so good, and it was enrapturing. And you know what else Season 2 feels like? Gratuitous. Like, Season 1 had a lot of nudity and sex in it. But it didn't feel as gratuitous. It didn't feel as exploitative as it does here. Like, characters just go to a strip club. Why? So we can show tits. That's why. And, like, I say this, like, they even have a legitimate burlesque number, which I appreciate as a burlesque performer. Cool, but, like... there's also all these sex scenes and the whole thing with Baron Samedi and like that. God, that was a complete narrative cul-de-sac that went nowhere. Again, wheel spinning, stalling, and I'm stalling now. I don't know why. I'll wrap up. American Gods Season 2. What'd you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. All the usual stuff to do. Like, subscribe, share this around, check out my Patreon, etc., etc., etc. But you do not have to pray and pay tribute to me. Because at the end of the day, folks, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.